Let's talk about D1-2, Descent into the Depths of the Earth by Gary Gygax. These are two modules that are part of his great bumper year of 1978. He published G1-3 Against the Giants, all three of those modules individually. I've reviewed them elsewhere on the channel. And he also published D3, Descent into the Depths of the Earth. So all these six connected modules all came out in the same year. I will review D3 in probably a couple of months. And these two modules, D1 and 2, came out individually and then together. And the basic assumption is players have played the Giants modules and they have taken the clues they discovered along the way of dark forces behind the Giants, and particularly in G3, and they've entered the Underdark through the passages underneath the Fire Giant King's palace in G3. So that's the basic assumption here. And so they're crawling around, they're crawling through the wilderness of the Underdark, underground, seeking the drow behind these evil plots on the surface. And the way to think about this as a combined product, if you have it as a combined product, is that there's a wilderness crawl with, there are 4 set mini locales and a bunch of encounter tables, plus 2 big locales or dungeons. Now, the wilderness crawl is pretty basic in its own, I'd say, and pretty sparse. It's also hard to parse or hard to kind of completely get a grip on what's wanted. It's got a slightly weird map and procedure. You can see that there's really just one detailed section there. That shaded section is detailed. The whole map is there, and you can use it as a wider bit of, Greyhawk's Underdark, or wherever you want your Underdark to be, including the Sunless Sea. However, the assumption is players are going to just go along the shaded section doing set encounters the whole time. And this feels very linear and narrow, especially given there's this whole map given. But when you realise that what Gary's aiming for is a tournament module situation, Gus Eller's talked about this. Gary ended up really liking writing tournament modules on the whole rather than anything for campaigns. The idea, you get these challenging situations, players are trying to do really well at it, and so naturally they're going to want to accept linearity because the objective is to score well compared to other tables. So it makes sense. It makes more sense than some linear products do. But you've got to bear that in mind. On the other hand, the encounters, the encounter tables are very good, and the encounter map system is pretty good. There are 3 encounter tables, D20 encounter tables, primary, secondary, and tertiary passage. And they are unique entries, so there are 60 entries. Not all are unique from each other, but I mean there are 60 distinct entries, 20 per table. There are drow patrols, and they are detailed. There are mixed patrols, including, you've got things like 11 to 16 bugbears and 4 ghasts with 7 to 12 ghouls. You've got level appropriate for levels 9 to 14 enemy parties to provide a challenge. You can see that there is a combat emphasis there, certainly. Though you can certainly do other stuff, it is not here's lots of negotiation situations. On the other hand, there are drow merchants in merchant trains, and indeed, there's even, by the way, there is a possibility of a lich on one of these charts, or a purple worm. There's very dangerous things, but there are drow merchants. There's no reason you can't negotiate with some of the others. There are also the encounter map system. So these 5 maps here provide maps for you to use on those encounters. There are 6 maps actually. That's a kind of primary passage, and the others are different secondary passages. There are different passages then that you can use to set your encounters. Number 2, I think, is used for a couple of the set encounters as well. But you can pick any of them. And there is some variation between them. 1, 2, and 3 are all fairly similar in that they are passages cutting across the map with kind of various side areas. The primary passage is obviously pretty simple too. But, you've got this kind of quirky one with passage 5. And you've got the river passage 4, which is used for a set encounter too. So there's enough variety, and it's just one of those things that takes the work out for you if you are just trying to, especially if you're mapping and you're using minis and stuff, it's taking the work out for you, and that's appreciated, I think. They're not startlingly varied, they are good, I would say. Now, the wilderness encounters are all at least okay. So as I say, there are 4 set wilderness encounters. There's a drow outpost, there is a illithid/were outpost, there is a weird set-piece encounter at the Svartjet River, and there is a hidden deep gnome base. And they're all, at least as I say, good. I'd say the Drow Patrol, or rather the Drow Outpost, has 2 separate patrol groups, male and female, and yeah, they're intelligent rivals of the party who are difficult to combat, with powerful leaders. You know, there's an evil high priestess with a lurker cloak, for instance. There's weird weapons such as they're throwing glass globe missiles, and they're using staff slings and things like that. It's a memorable encounter. I've run it, and it was one I think my party enjoyed. There's also stuff that you can see it connects to reporting back to the main base. You know, you if you come here and you don't wipe them all out, reports will get back to the Drow of what's happening and that you're active in the Underdark. There is another one, as I say, Illithids and Were-Rats. These are enemies of the Drow, and there's kind of an assumption that you might end up fighting them. They've got a Drow merchant captive, and they're torturing him. They'll kill him before he escapes. And there's an assumption that the Rat Men, the Were-Rats and the Illithids will attack you, which does mean you can get in with this Drow merchant, or you could just let him die and take his stuff for free. The Mind Flayers also have stuff. It's probably less exciting than the main Drow one, but it is a different challenge, and it's got Illithids in it, and this is maybe the first appearance of Illithids in an adventure, so worth bearing in mind as a kind of historical point, if nothing else. The other 2, one at the Svartjet River is this borderline crazy Kuo-Toa who only speaks Undercommon and gets angry if you don't understand him, and will go crazy and try to kill you and get his giant Gar friend to try to kill you as well. But you might be able to get your way across peacefully. That's fun and entertaining, and it is a social situation, but a very febrile one. And the other is Troshly Garnet Getter and his deep gnome spies or soldiers who are spying on the Shrine of the Kuo-Toa. So those are more actively, ordinarily social encounters with different dynamics, and trying to find a way to ally with the deep gnomes, you know, so they help you do something with the Kuo-Toa. That's an interesting challenge. They're all worth it, as I say. They're all full of life and opportunity. They're not all-time great on their own, but then this is a whole module, and they are very good. They're not on their own, though. They're part of this big map with 2 big dungeons. The first of these dungeons is, much the less important of them, which is this one, the Caves or Caverns of the Troglodytes, which it's a nice map, I should say. Kind of an interesting cavern system with lots of different sections. You can see there's water features and lots of tunnels and complex stone formations. So I wouldn't want to say that it is not an interesting dungeon, but the actual contents are relatively simple, it's fair to say. It's a very good challenge environment, is what it is. It's a major way station of the Drow, guarding their roads. It's got lots of their servitors, so it's got lots of Drow, it's got lots of Bugbear, it's got lots of Troglodytes. But it's also got some weird extras. It's got a hidden lich who uses 600 magic mouth spells to detect magic users. It's got a magical pool, which is a puzzle to work out and then can let you get wealth out of it. It's got some tethered wyverns, or wyverns. So it's fun, but it is an aperitif, I'd say. It's interesting. It was obviously the finale of D1, but D1 is itself, would have been originally a 12-page module, and it feels fairly slight on its own, certainly compared to the Giants modules of the same length. It's an aperitif, I think I'd say. On its own, it must have been a strange module. You know, wander around the Underdark, go and do a heavy combat, but relatively simple dungeon. But it is flexible. It can be a base assault. It can be an infiltration. Nonetheless, it's basically loads of monsters with a few quirky encounters. But when you understand it in the context of this dual module, you understand its training. It is a setup for the big boy, the real centerpiece of this, the Shrine of the Kuo-Toa. The Shrine, which is D2's finale. You can see there, again, pretty big, pretty complex. Technically has some underground areas too that are not very clear, you know, when you're just glancing at it on my camera. This is one of the great D&D dungeon environments or locations or whatever you want to call it. It's a fully developed Kuo-Toa temple and settlement. It's a great accomplishment in creating a vibe. There is a whole thing where Gygax is pushing as hard as possible on the sense that this is a different environment. I'll come back to that, but nonetheless, that there are things like entrance to the main southern entrance is described thus. The party is met by a chilling scene when first they step far enough northwest to view the dimly lit space ahead. Greenish phosphorescence from lichens, coupled with a greyish luminosity from slug-like creatures as large as a man's fist which crawl everywhere, walls, ceilings, floors, give the area an undersea appearance, and a strange salt tang is in the air to enhance this impression. Directly to the north, the adventurers will see a huge dark green creature, rather like a giant lobster-headed woman with one pincer raised and the right extended at her head and open. That's further into the shrine itself. But you can see he's going for atmosphere here. There's bits of read aloud, essentially, which are good. They're actually good read aloud. They're not that long. They're very rich. They're weird. And he's setting up an environmental vibe. It is incredibly well detailed. I wouldn't say it's overwritten at any point. But each room, or many of the rooms, will get 4 or 5 paragraphs. And all the content is relevant. And when you think 4 or 5 paragraphs of relevant information is an enormous amount. When you compare it to some later TSR or Wizards products where the same amount of information will take 4 or 5 pages, you understand the change in writing style. It's not overly terse either, compared to some of the stuff in D1 or occasionally in other modules of Gygax's. It is detailed enough to really use. Now, it also has detailed tactics, all the things you'd expect from a Gygax module. It's also flexible as to approach. You can just go in peacefully. You could be pilgrims to go, to the great goddess Blibdulplup, and so why wouldn't they let you in to do your pilgrimage and your religious duties? And so you don't have to say, well, we'll go in fighting. When my party went in, they are allied with the deep gnomes, and they concealed the deep gnomes and came in as pilgrims, and then basically snuck off toward the prison section in the eastern wing, broke out the prisoners, which is what the deep gnomes wanted amongst other stuff, and then fled out to the west. They had to then fight through a kind of not quite pitched battle, but a running semi-pitched battle where they fought many different patrols of Kuo-Toa with their newly rearmed army of freed slaves, plus the well-armed, very professional deep gnomes. So yeah, there's a kind of a flexibility in approach. It could also be that if you have plenty of allies or you have a particularly good plan, you just assault it. So they didn't attack Vargul, the chieftain. They did fight Kup-Ul, I think his name is, the chief monitor, their job is to ensure that no Kuo-Toa goes too insane, and if they do, they kill them. They did fight him. He was invisible. They managed to take him out eventually, and the Ring of Invisibility was taken by the party's wizard, and I decided it was connected to the goddess Blibdulplup herself, so that was a head screw. So flexible as to approach, that was one way of doing it. You could do other ways. And the module is worth it then for the shrine alone, I'd say. It's one of the great environments in D&D. It's the first full-blown Underdark environment. It feels much more fully developed than the Caverns of the Troglodytes. It's certainly much weirder and distinctive. It's a big building block, the whole module, but particularly the shrine for D3. It's an obvious inspiration as well for Night Below's City of the Glass Pool, and arguably it feels to me like it's inspired Bruce Cordell's work. Cordell, I think, is the only adventure designer who really rivals Gary Gygax in the top tier. I don't know that this is the case, but it certainly feels like when you're reading some of the Sahugin trilogy, when you're reading some of the Baroque over-the-topness of some of the stuff in the Illithid trilogy or the Gates of Firestorm Peak. There's definitely a feel of stuff from D2 and D3 in there for me. The final thing to consider is the specific influence, or one specific influence of this module, that this is where the Underdark is created. You have those tantalising hints, particularly in G3, and you enter the Underdark in G3. But this is where the Underdark really comes to be. It's weird, it's raw. Some of it feels normal, environments where you adventure, fight, negotiate. Very rarely or never is it out and out as crazy as some of the stuff in Veins of the Earth by Patrick Stewart, which is one of my favourite Underdark supplements. But there is a constant askew weirdness. The Drow are much more cracked and strange than the kind of elegant but ruthless version later on, particularly as they're developed through the Forgotten Realms. Setting I like, Drow I like, but I'm talking about the kind of the strangeness and alienness of the Underdark here, and these Drow from G3 through to D3 come across as much stranger. The Kuo-Toa are new and dangerous. They're just weird. They've got a weird cult thing. The environments they have are something that has never been seen in D&D before, and very rarely do later modules imagine a fantastic naturalistic environment as well as this. Something which is both weird but feels real. The other malign monster introduced in the module is the Germlane, or Bane Midge, who's just a weird, bizarre, vicious, like tiny prankster, which seems like an odd left field addition. Certainly, it's less less immediately obviously connected, but it shows the way that Gary's mind was working as the module was designed. It's the appearance, as I say, I think for the first time in an adventure, if not very early appearance, by the Illithid, and the Illithid or Mind Flayer is one of the iconic monsters, isn't it? And the actual environments are constantly strange, like that entrance to the shrine, like the ferry over the Svartjet, where you turn up and there's just a mad fish man, and he's willing to take you over, but you don't understand him probably, and he doesn't understand you, and then he attacks you with a giant fish. They're not just fantastic, but they are disconcerting as well, and I think that's and you think about something like C.S. Lewis's Silver Chair, the idea that the underworld should be disconcerting. That's a very good Underdark resource for what it's worth. It's constantly disconcerting, and it's full of weird and fun stuff. Along with these three, it's arguable that the Underdark has never been equalled in an ordinary module before or since. No, never before, of course, because it was invented then, and never since. Apart from Night Below coming close, I can't think of anything else that, as a normal module, not as Veins of the Earth, which is a kind of tool set, but as a thing you can run at your table, and this is eminently runnable, I can't think of anything that comes close. What do you think? If you've read the modules, what did you think? Can you think of any other Underdark modules that come close for you? And if you've run it, how did it go? Tell me in the comments.